This week we're brewing 2 beers for the price of 1. I'm brewing an English barley wine and Parti-Gyle.
Running round, feet over the ground, hear the sound.
I'm Martin Keane, and on this channel, the Homebrew Challenge, I brew a different beer each week until I've worked my way through 99 styles. Except this week, I'm actually brewing 2 beers. The main beer is English barley wine. This is an intense, malty sipper. And then I'm going to reuse the same grains from the barley wine to brew a second beer.
Together in the wreckage of a world undone, we will heal.
And that is through a process called Parti-Gyle, which is basically taking the mash, all of the grains from that mash from the first brew, and then reusing them in a second brew. So effectively kind of a second runnings through the mash bed. Now, Parti-Gyle has a rich history with English barley wine. And we'll look at the whole process about Parti-Gyle in just a little bit. But first of all, let's focus on English barley wine. And barley wine is a style that doesn't mess about. I will in fact be brewing 2 different barley wines on my homebrew challenge. There's a English barley wine and an American barley wine. That'll probably come as a little surprise that the English barley wine is more malt forward and the American barley wine is more hop forward. And in addition to that strong malt character, the beer also has a high ABV. The style guidelines support up to 12% ABV for an English barley wine. This is also a beer that does really well with aging. As the beer ages, it oxidizes slightly, and that will bring out notes of sweetness like toffee and honey. In terms of recipe design, this is not a complicated beer to make. You want to use a good biscuity base malt, something like Maris Otter, and a whole lot of it. So I'm going to build a gravity here of around 1089 as my original gravity. I'm never quite sure what conversion I'm going to get with these bigger beers, but this is about what I'm aiming for, which should give us ABV around 9%. In terms of what's actually in the grist, well, 87% of the grist is the aforementioned Maris Otter. I then have 5% Crystal 45, 5% Amber Malt, and then 3% of Cara-Pils. The grains have gone in for their first mash. This is for the English barley wine. I'm mashing in here at 152 Fahrenheit, 67 Celsius for about an hour. I'm performing a quick mash out. This is at 76 Celsius or 168 Fahrenheit. And I'm going to, in a moment, pull these grains out, let all the water drain through into the kettle, and then start the boil. Now, normally at this stage of the brew day, I would be busy emptying out the grains out of my grain basket and giving it a rinse, but not today. This is just going to sit here and wait its turn for a second go. Now, as I alluded to, there's not a huge amount of hop character in this beer, just bittering hops. I am going to add 67 IBU of bittering hops, which sounds like an enormous amount, but when you consider the gravity, this isn't really going to make the beer particularly bitter. I'm using Target, and I'm going to use 2 ounces in a 5-gallon batch. So I have the barley wine transferred into my fermenter. It's still just a little bit warm. The groundwater is so warm this time of year. So I'm just going to put it in my chest freezer for a little while to cool off before I add the yeast. But now I'm going to give everything a quick rinse and get ready for the second beer. So the idea here is with this Parti-Gyle that there are still sugars left in this grain that are basically available for conversion. So by putting this back into a fresh mash, so more clean water at about 152 Fahrenheit or 67 Celsius, then we can extract more of the sugars and make another beer. And if you just taste this, it is still really sweet. So I'm going to be very interested to see what sort of conversion rate I get from this. Let's put it in. Now the method I'm using for Parti-Gyle to create two completely separate beers isn't the only way to use this technique. Another thing you can do is to create blended beers. So you take the runnings from the first mash, those will be a higher gravity, and then the runnings from the second mash, those will be a lower gravity, and you can combine them or blend them to get the exact gravity that you want. And apparently this is how some breweries still do this today, including some of the Fuller's beers. Speaking of gravity, the gravity of the barley wine came in at 1083. That's a few points under what I was going for of 1089. I was checking the gravity on this one quite closely, and at the pre-boil stage I was pretty much right on. So somewhere in the boil stage, I guess I didn't have quite the boil off rate I would expect, but we're not too far off. Then for the yeast, I'm adding in Wyeast 1028, that is London Ale. This one is quite happy with higher gravity beers, and it should also support the slightly fruity profile we're hoping to get with a bit of aging. Now I've just taken a pre-boil gravity, now the mash is done, and I have a pre-boil gravity of 1024. So I was able to extract some stuff out of that malt. And we're on track here for a beer around 2.9%. Now it's time to add some hops, and I'm going to just use the same hop schedule as I used for the barley wine. So that's just a bittering hop, and that's going to be Target. And I have here 0.35 ounces of Target hops, which I'm going to put in now. Why 0.35 Target hops? Well, let me explain. So I've done a bit of reverse engineering in Beersmith. Let me show you. So what I did is I took my pre-boil gravity reading, which was 1020 at 95 Fahrenheit. So the corrected adjusted value is 1024. That is my current gravity pre-boil. Then what I did is I took my recipe for the barley wine and just replicated it here for Parti-Gyle. So the same base malts, same hops as well. And I changed the brewhouse efficiency to 20%. Why 20%? Well, a bit of reverse engineering. I looked at my Parti-Gyle here and I adjusted that until I got to a pre-boil gravity that was pretty close to what my actual pre-boil gravity was. So 20%, so I would get a pre-boil gravity of 1023. I got 1024, so that's pretty close. Now, if I just keep everything the same, I do a 30-minute boil, and add the same Target hops in, I'm going to get an IBU rating of 103, which is kind of ridiculous. So to address that, we need to bring down the number of hops we add. Now what I did here is I switched to a style that has a similar original gravity. So we have an estimated original gravity here of 1029, and ordinary bitter has a original gravity about the same, and it's a similar set of ingredients. So if I change the amount of bittering hops I'm going to add to 0.35, you can see now that that puts me at an IBU rating of 26, and that's more or less in the range of what you'd expect from a beer like this. So yeah, my made up beer style is going to have an IBU of roughly 26. Final gravity came in at 1024, so again it ended up coming a little bit under what we expected to get based on boil off. So it's pretty consistent between both beers, so I think I need to just make an adjustment in Beersmith for that. But regardless, yeah, we've actually got something that has the potential to be beer here. To actually make it beer, going to need to add some yeast. Now I did think about using the same yeast for this beer as well and just basically having a weaker version of barley wine, but I've elected to pick something else. So I've gone for German ale yeast. This is White Labs 029, and I'm going to ferment with that, and it'll be quite interesting to see the difference between the two beers considering that they do have different yeasts. And I'm electing to ferment this beer in a corny keg. That's something that worked quite well when I tried it before, and also it has the advantage of it fits in my Keyser. Okay, so gonna let these guys ferment, and then I'm gonna have 2 beers for tasting. So, 2 beers for 1, Evan.
Yeah, you're inviting me back and giving me double the trouble.
Absolutely. So let's start with, well, first of all, let's just start with the appearance of both of these beers, because they're the same mash, but of course they're different beers.
Completely different, yeah. Very sort of dark, kind of, yeah, on the way to like a darky stout colour. Just personally, this was the one I would be picking if we were just based on colour, but I'm not sure about taste yet.
Okay, let's just discard this one for a minute.
Alright, we'll come back to you later.
Yeah, and we're going to focus on the main event, which is the barley wine. So let's see what we get on aroma with this beer.
For anybody who's a fan of maybe English breakfast food, this has a smell of sort of Marmite, which is a sort of yeast extract type thing. Very strong, very brown. So I would say that, yeah, maybe bready a little bit as well.
Yeah,
what we're getting.
Yeah, I would agree with a bit of yeasty, bready kind of smell on it. Now this beer is 6 weeks old.
Okay.
I would like to have aged it for much longer than that, and the style should be aged for maybe 6 months. And the reason I bring that up now is because of what you said about the aroma.
Yep.
Is I think the sort of the yeasty, bready smell is because it's so young.
Okay. And so, would we expect the colour to change as well as it got older, or would we be looking at this sort of colour?
We would hope that the colour stays the same,
okay,
because if the colour changes, it's probably been oxidised. So.
Okay. Alright, so we're looking good so far.
Yeah, okay, so let's finally get to the taste for this one.
That's very strong. No, that has a very strong, like, it coats the mouth, I would say, like it's thick. Mm-hmm. And to me it almost tastes like the beginning of a liquor. Like it almost has like a sort of whiskey type flavour.
Yep, definitely would love to age this a little bit more so that we can really develop some of the characters. I think it does have a sort of a whiskey or maybe a brandy kind of tone to it. But I think that's only going to get better with a bit more time. And I know we said that with some of the other beers recently, but it's very drinkable in its current form, but I would like to give it a little bit longer.
Oh, we can slide in here's one you made earlier.
Here's one I made earlier. So this is the Parti-Gyle. It's a totally made up style.
Yep.
Just using the same mash, different yeast, just see what comes out of it.
Well, I gotta say, the flavour of the barley wine is still deep in my mouth, so I'm not sure I can be completely biased, but maybe it will help.
Yeah.
With the ingredients you use, what would you most compare it to? I
mean, it should come in as some kind of English style ale, I think is what you'd expect from the mash. I'm not getting the caramel sweetness that you would get from an English ale. No. I'm not really getting any sort of hop flavour, any earthy flavour.
No, absolutely no hops.
No. It tastes like when I first started brewing in Mr. Beer Kits and I was doing it wrong.
Well, I distinctly remember there was an apple flavour at one point.
Well,
I wouldn't say apple here, but
no.
I know what you mean. Not the flavours you're expecting.
Yeah.
So you took a shot about using the leftover ingredients, like you should recycle, but maybe it hasn't worked so well here.
No, I think it hasn't really worked out. I think what we've got here is we've got a sipper
Yes.
and a tipper.
A tipper, yes.